Jumpin' In on Manx Radio.
With Howard and Chris Kane.
Hello.
Good evening.
And welcome. Ah, yes, and here we are yet again. In a flash, as they say, as we alternate with our sister programme, Sweet and Swing. Of course, it is Jumpin' In this evening, the first of our specials, with myself, H.
And me, Chris. Yes, welcome along to this week's Jumpin' In, as we look back at a selection of the best releases from 2024 in part one of a two-part retrospective. And what was it in a year with multiple releases from all the main labels, ECM, Edition, Blue Note, Act, Positone, Ubuntu and many others? We've been royally spoilt for choice. So H, what's been on repeat in the car or returning to your turntable, and what have you brought this week?
You know, there's too much really, isn't it? There is too much. There's been a plethora of good stuff. OK, my starters for 10 this week then will include Mary Halverson, the wonderful Melissa Eldana and Dave Douglas.
And from me, while we say nothing about the Small Stones, we make an elegant appearance. We look out for a sign, and to kick things off, we're all smiles. Here's Mark Lockhart with Morning Smiles from his album Smiling. And there he goes off with another smile on the way, no doubt. Mark Lockhart with an all-star ensemble and Morning Smiles from his edition release, Smiling. Saxophonist Mark Lockhart has been a mainstay in the British scene, and you're going to hate this, H. We think of him as one of the young lions.
Well, he was originally.
For over 40 years. With bands such as Loose Tubes, Perfect Houseplants, and of course Polar Bear on his CV, not to mention several highly reviewed albums in his own name. Mark says with Smiling, he was following in the footsteps of Nucleus, Mike Gibbs, Isotope and Colosseum, seamlessly fusing jazz and rock to create an exuberant and charismatic soundscape. And who are we to argue? And what a band! Mark and Nathaniel Facey on saxes, George Crowley and James Alsop on clarinets, Laura Jerd and Mike Soper on trumpets, Jane Rattigan and Anna Drysdale on French horns, Henry Mound on trombones, Roland Sutherland, very good, on flutes, and fellow loose tuber John Paricelli on guitar, with Tom Herbert on the bass and Dave Smith at the drums. And what a joyous noise they make.
A joyous noise indeed. Jumping in, Chris and myself, H, with the first of two programmes of looking back at some of our favourites. There are probably even more. You'd fill several programmes. It was a cracking year of jazz in 2024. And you mentioned some of the major labels. Blue Note having a great renaissance. I think maybe Don was possibly responsible for that, the man in the hat with the dark shades. But he has certainly got a great roster of fantastic artists and really at the peak of their game, whether they're young or old. I'm thinking of either Charles Lloyd or this woman, Melissa Aldana. I first saw her a few years ago with a Crash Trio at the Pizza Express when she was still very much a Sonny Rollins acolyte, but she's now found her own voice very much with her group, and I think has 2, 3, I've lost track now, on the Blue Note label. Her latest one came out earlier in 2024 called Echoes of the Inner Prophet, and from that we are going to hear Unconscious Whispers. Loving that from Melissa Aldana with her current quartet from the album in 2024, Echoes of the Inner Prophet. And like I said, really finding her own voice, and this sort of unique voice which sort of blends again, there's still hints of sort of the classics like sort of Sonny Rollins and such like that big open voice on the tenor, but then a wonderful blend of her sort of own Chilean sort of background as well, some modern sounds, some very subtle electronics and effects put in there as well. By Lager Lunt on guitar and effects, then Pablo Manara's bass, Kusha Bedi drums, and Fabian Amazon on acoustic piano, and also putting in some effects as well. And it's just wonderful to see her, as I say, sort of develop over the years, and certainly since she's been at Blue Note, she's been coming out. She was a wonderful player before, but just coming out with that unique sound now, which has a little bit of the sort of sound of Brian Blade's Fellowship about it, maybe a little bit. A touch of that sound there. I definitely think maybe a little bit of another artist, favourite of mine, Dave Douglas, as well, here and there. Some of that use of electronics very subtly, very well done and interwoven into the music. And definitely I look forward to any new work from her.
Very enjoyable indeed. And in fact, she's popping up on quite another number of other recordings as well. And as you were saying, H, picking records for this show has been especially difficult, as the standard, it just continues getting higher and higher every year. And I don't know about you, but I'm still working my way through the terrific selection of last year's releases, truthfully. And the other thing is, many of the published picks of the year, they seem to either have forgotten the early releases from spring 24 or completely missed the late releases due to publication deadlines. So my criteria has been to simply choose records I've been coming back to without some are missing favourites because they were just too long to fit in the show.
You know what? I think at the end of the day, that's it, isn't it? That's the way to follow. It's very subjective, and the way to judge your favourites are the ones you come back to.
Exactly what you come back to. So I'm sure, though, many of you were disappointed, as we were, to hear that the great John Sermon has stepped back from touring. Now, we've been lucky enough to see him several times, and in fact, he's been a guest on the show more than once. However, stopping touring does not mean he's stopping recording. And now, in his 81st year, he's playing as well as ever, as this recent release on ECM shows. Here's Pebble Dance. Pebble Dance there, taken from John Sermon's 2024 ECM release, Words Unspoken. Sermon makes his recorded debut, way back in 1969. And from early days on seminal recordings such as Extrapolation with John McLaughlin, through many of the best big band recordings, and of course his original early use of sequencers and synthesizers to bring him on, back in with a range of woodwinds, often with his partner Karen Krogh on vocals, creating instantly recognisable soundscapes. And in fact, the first time we saw him, I think, was at Bracknell doing exactly that, wasn't it? With his
it was, yeah, when the power
Synthi
went
AKS
off,
and the Mini Moog sequencing away, and the power went off, so they did an acoustic set until the power came back on again. Well, his latest recording sees him teamed with American Vibes player Rob Waring, who, like Sermon, has now been a resident of Oslo for many years. And along with the British guitarist Rob Luft and Norwegian drummer and percussionist and electronics user Thomas Stroenen. And I think you'll agree, Sermon's not just a placeholder there. His fire has not diminished over the years, and to me, he's still blowing as well as ever, and hopefully there'll be more to come.
Absolutely, and great, as you say, to hear him, even though he's not touring anymore, which will be a sad loss. I must admit to think that we'll never see him perform live again, but so much good recorded stuff. And he says he will still be recording, hopefully, which would be lovely. And yeah, that album was on my list as well, because the previous two were lovely, but I just thought a little bit smooth. There was no real edge there. I thought it was almost sort of skittering close to sort of Muzak here and there. Lovely,
to be fair,
lovely
they were recorded under the pressed circumstances of post-COVID and access and so on.
But that one
think.
really, I thought he was right bang on form again, and I'm glad to see it made it into the top 20, I think, for Jazzwise and some of the critics as well. Wonderful stuff.
Hello, this is Pablo Held, and you're listening to Jumping In on Manx Radio.
Dave Douglas, of course, and I hope you recognised his take there on Take the A Train from his album Gifts, which came out in 2024. He's so prolific, he's probably brought out another 6 albums since that one came out earlier in the year. He's an amazingly prolific producer of albums, trumpeter, live gig player, tourer, educator. He just never stops, and I can't think what age is he, and it must be certainly well into his 60s now, I thought. I could be doing him a disservice there, but playing as well as ever. And he's another chameleon. Yeah? Every time you get another Dave Douglas album, chances are it's very different to the last one. A bit like John Scofield and, of course, Miles before him as well. You can't just buy a Dave Douglas album and think, yeah, that's what it's going to be. The trumpet sound will be there somewhere, but it might be electronics, it might be just pure solo, it might be sort of Balkan-type music, it could be purely acoustic, it could be fully electronic. He goes hither and thither, a complete musical minstrel, I think, in a modern sense, in more ways than one. He's there with, of course, a band. I think he's been playing with drummer Ian Chang for quite some time now, Rafik Bhatia on guitar, James Brandon Lewis, who seems to be almost ubiquitous these days. He gets everywhere. Not to say albums under his own name, which hit the top list as well for quite a few critics. But Dave Douglas, yeah, never far from my turntable, it has to be said, or should I say CD player, or downloads, take your pick.
And he's 61, God bless him.
61.
And, of course, has a relatively new record label of his own, Greenleaf Records.
Well, yeah, there's loads of stuff on that.
Yeah, which has a lot of great names on it. And you're right, I had 3 or 4, I think, with James Brandon Lewis that easily could have made my list, but didn't in this occasion. And the one who did is a pianist who's been around for many, many years, since taking, and perhaps where he's best known for jazz fans, for he took the piano stool with Tony Williams' Lifetime, straight after his qualifying at college for 2 years and 2 albums. Pardon me, excuse me. Before going on to work with Alan Holdsworth, and then he spent many years touring with rock artists, including Bob Dylan, Ray Charles, Ray Cooder, Elton John, Bob Seger, many, many more. Then worked on many TV soundtracks and film soundtracks before forming a trio with Peter Erskine, and then rejoined Lifetime, and somewhere along the way he managed to record a number of jazz albums which have just been recently released on the Postcards label, which is now owned by the Arcadia Company. As far as I can see, it's their first release, but you'll see after we listen why they must have been recorded a while ago. From last year's Ellingtonia, here's Emergence. Yeah, one I've been returning to quite a lot. Alan Pasqua with Emergence, an original composition of his from his recent release Ellingtonia. And I can't find any details about the original recording dates, but he does seem to be releasing some real gems from his cupboard under the stairs. And if you thought that sounded pretty good, perhaps it's not surprised, as it has quite a who's who of American artists. The Brecker brothers, Randy and Michael, on trumpet and sax respectively, along with Gary Bartz also on alto, Roger Rosenberg on flute, Jack Schatz on trombone, Dave Tefani on bass clarinet, Willie Olneck also on trumpet, Dave Holland on bass, and the drum seat shared between Paul Motian and Jack DeJohnette, and of course Alan Pasqua as composer and piano. And let's hope there's more to come.
More to come indeed. It is for one of the best of jazz 2024 for us, at least. Chris and myself, H, here on Jumping In on Manx Radio. Any thoughts you've got, by the way, of course, just drop us a line. Howard Kane at manxradio.com, Chris Kane at manxradio.com, Caine for the Kane, not with the K, please. And love to hear from you if you've got any thoughts on that, wherever you might be listening. One which did make it to quite a few lists is the brilliant Mary Halverson, who again is pretty prolific, brought two out last year, sort of back to back, and then in 2024, that's in 2023, she brought two back to back, Amaryllis and Belladonna, I think it was, and then Cloudwood in 2024, which for my money was one of the more accessible albums she's brought out in recent times. Sometimes quite experimental, but this one I thought you could get your teeth into perhaps a little bit more easily than normal, but always music which rewards close listening. Here she is with Desiderata. hear people saying that's more accessible. Well, it is, I think, in many ways, because it's, again, she sort of moved towards this idea of sort of, it's more of a sort of almost like with the Amarilla Sextet. So there's a touch of sort of like chamber music and sort of composition. And again, as John Fordham, I think, said, fusing it with improvisation as well, very much. So it's sort of part composed, part improvised. It's got a slightly more clear stylistic route in many ways. The vibe sounds coming in always gives me a little hint of Eric Dolphy from time to time. I think from Out to Lunch or something like that. There's sort of the use of the vibes there in the sextet. And yeah, she comes very much from a sort of free sort of background. I think was with a disciple of Anthony Braxton, the wonderful sax player, at one stage in her life when she was a little bit younger, and now very much her own woman, and carving out a great niche in this sort of space of improvised music, on music which has been composed to a degree, and almost with there is a vague classical tinge to it, or at least that idea of a sort of chamber quartet or sextet or something. That's the way it comes across to my ears in any case. And I really enjoy the sound she produces with the Amarilla Sextet. Adam O'Farrell, trumpet, Jacob Gottschalk, trombone, or Gottschalk, beg his pardon, Mary, of course, on guitar, Patricia Brennan on vibraphone, Nick Dunstan bass, and long-time drummer Thomas Fujiwara. And Laurie Anderson appears on the album as well on one track. Terrific stuff. Mary Halverson Cloudwood did score pretty well with a lot of critics.
Lovely stuff indeed. And she's another one who uses electronics as an instrument rather than just an effect. And that's about it for this week's show, but I can just about fit in a track from one of my favourite pianists over the last couple of years, Stockholm-based composer and pianist Adam Forkelid, with his quartet of Carl Murner Ringstrom on guitar. Fantastic guitarist he is too. Nicholas Fernqvist on bass, Daniel Fredriksson at the drums, and Adam, of course, at the piano. Here's the title track from their recent release, Turning Point. Adam says, recorded in just one day, the music tries to catch an emotion that was fleeting in the air. It came both with ease and through struggle. At the end, we're left with fragments of all the feelings, thoughts and experiences it's given us, and the whole thing becomes a memory. See you next time.
Indeed. See you the week after next for part 2.
Bye for now.